Phoebe Handsjuk lay alone in the dark, slowly dying, on the floor of the garbage compactor room of the luxury Balencia apartment tower in Melbourne, Australia. She had fallen 12 stories down the building's main rubbish disposal chute. Her blood left a trail on the floor as she tried to crawl towards the exit door. The rubbish compactor blade had all but severed her right foot, and she dragged her broken body across the ground to try to escape the filthy room. It was a horrible way to die. Police who arrived at the apartment complex in Melbourne said they had never seen anything like it. Phoebe had plunged down the small rubbish chute of the high-end apartment building. She had survived the 129-foot fall only to die soon after from blood loss. We know Phoebe fought for her life, even as it drained away from her severed femoral artery. She died face up, right at the garbage room door. The concierge who later found the 24-year-old's body initially mistook her for a mannequin that someone had tossed away with the trash. So how did Phoebe, a beautiful 24-year-old woman, end her days in the basement of an upscale apartment tower in Melbourne, Australia in the winter of 2010? To fully investigate this case, we need to dive deep. So without further ado, let's start the breakdown. Who was Phoebe Handsjuk? At the time of her death, she was a 24-year-old receptionist at a marketing firm. But Phoebe was so much more than that. Back when she was in high school and playing on her school's varsity basketball team, her mother would tell the story of how, when somebody fouled her during a basketball game, she would suddenly rise to a different level of play. She would speed from one end of the court to the other. Afterwards, the parents of the players would ask, "Hey, what got into Phoebe? Why doesn't she play like that all the time?" But it was because someone had done her wrong that gave her that extra push to excel. She had a very close relationship with her grandmother, Jeanette Campbell. In 2000, Jeanette and Phoebe became closer than ever when Jeanette went back to university, which meant she often stayed at Phoebe's parents, Len and Natalie. She was there when Phoebe began experiencing the ups and downs of adolescence. Jeanette was aware that Phoebe sometimes drank alcohol without parental supervision. "I didn't believe it was a problem back then," she says. In her mid-teens, Phoebe began hanging out with the wrong crowd, as her grandmother puts it. She had a group of friends who lived in Kew, all attractive and well-educated girls from good families who started experimenting with speed, ecstasy, marijuana, and alcohol. Phoebe admitted to Jeanette that she was taking recreational drugs, but she didn't go into details. As Phoebe got older, she felt people were often attracted to her because of her appearance rather than for who she was. She tended to avoid going out in groups where there were lots of strangers, as she felt their attention stressful. If she did go to parties, she drank just to feel like she fit in. When she was 15, Phoebe ran away from home. The relationship between her parents was deteriorating, and she was attracted by the idea of escaping parental supervision. The police couldn't help, as they couldn't force her to return. In any case, her parents had no idea where she was. She was living in a squat downtown, and after 8 weeks she returned to her parents. This would become a continuing refrain throughout her life. Something bad would happen in Phoebe's life, and she would disappear for a few days or weeks, only to return out of the blue to her parents. Phoebe left school at the end of her junior year. After leaving school, she worked various entry-level jobs. Phoebe was convinced she was depressed. Her mood swings were apparent to all who were close to her, and even though her father, Len, was a psychiatrist, he referred her to one of his friends for therapy. Her doctor prescribed antidepressants, but Phoebe would stop taking them as soon as she felt better. Then, she'd become depressed again. Her drinking was also a constant problem. She drank often and in large amounts. Her mom recalls one day in her 20s when she came home from work and found blood on the trampoline and in the bathroom sink. Phoebe was nowhere to be found, and when her family finally tracked her down, she said she had cut her hand making art, but her mom knew she had been drinking. Jeanette also had concerns about Phoebe and her drinking. She says, "I wouldn't see her drunk, but I would often hear from her the next day when she was suffering the effects. When Phoebe drank, she could become verbally aggressive and a bit smart-mouthed, sometimes saying things that might result in her getting into trouble." On one occasion, Phoebe and her grandmother were having coffee together when Jeanette noticed a Band-Aid on Phoebe's arm. Reaching across, she pushed up Phoebe's sleeve. "What's this?" "I cut myself." "Not deliberately?" "Yes, deliberately. I didn't mean to do anything bad. I just wanted to hurt myself," she told Jeanette. "Not to harm yourself, though, not suicide?" Jeanette asked. No, just hurt myself." "You must promise me that if you ever have any thoughts like this again, you will contact me, day or night. Do you promise?" Yes, I promise." According to her mom, Phoebe had cut herself on the arms from when she was in her late teens and perhaps as late as her early 20s. She was never hospitalized for this or for any mental illness. She was only aware of a couple of occasions, but Phoebe did confide in her once that she had deliberately cut herself. Phoebe's early relationships tended to be with older men. This may have reflected a search for father figures after the breakup of her parents' marriage. She had a fear of dependency and yet seemed to gravitate towards men in authority or men with a controlling nature. Her first serious relationship was with Miles, her school teacher, that lasted for about 2 years. Her relationships tended to be unstable, with periods of drinking and flirtations with other men. She was always filled with remorse afterwards, but the ups and downs weren't a good basis for long-term commitments. In mid-2009, Phoebe met Anthony Hampel, Ant for short. She was 23 and he was nearly 40. He was financially secure and very well connected. His father is George Hempel, the Victorian Supreme Court judge, and his stepmom is Court Judge Felicity Hempel. He worked in the glittering world of music promotion, fashion, and big events. Ant was running his own firm, A-Live Events, and was doing very nicely. Ant's friends were rich and interesting. They dated for about 5 months, and in October 2009, he invited her to move into his apartment at Valencia. He quickly had her quit her job as a receptionist at a hairdresser's, and Ant found her a job at Savvy, an advertising agency, which was more in keeping with his lifestyle. She worked 3 days a week, which left her with plenty of time on her hands. Maybe too much. Phoebe was generally pretty happy with Ant, but the relationship soon started showing signs of instability. Once when Ant was in Paris and Phoebe stayed behind in Melbourne, she had made a deal with Ant that she wouldn't drink alcohol while he was away, but she fell off the wagon at the opening of an art exhibition. Ant had been trying to reach her unsuccessfully from Paris on Skype. When Phoebe called him back, they had a huge fight, with Ant saying things like, "I don't even know who's sleeping in my bed," hence questioning her fidelity. For Phoebe, taking part in Melbourne's high life wasn't such a good move. Much of Ant's life revolved around dinners, lunches, parties, and socializing, all events that were accompanied by drinking. For Phoebe, who tried many times to kick the drinking habit, this lifestyle wasn't just exciting, it was dangerous. In the weeks leading up to her death, Phoebe made 4 attempts to end her relationship with Ant. Her behavior was becoming more erratic, attracting notice from her friends and family. She left Ant's apartment on October 20th to visit her grandma Jeanette. This wasn't just a social visit. She did not intend to return. When she arrived, she told Jeanette that she had left Ant and was going to resign from her advertising job, get a job in MacLeod, where her grandmother lived, and try to stay off the booze. She also wanted to go volunteering in India, but to Jeanette, this seemed like too much at once. She encouraged Phoebe to go a little bit slower and maybe start by attending an AA meeting in MacLeod, then return to Melbourne and resign from her job properly and tell Ant face-to-face that the relationship was over. Jeanette thought that it was better to make a clean break and not to just run away from her problems. Phoebe did eventually attend an AA meeting. Later, the woman who drove her was so concerned with her state of mind that she dropped in the next day to check on her. This woman later said in a statement to the police that Phoebe's cell phone constantly rang while she was there, but Phoebe refused to take the calls. She explained it was Ant trying to persuade her to come back, and she told the woman that she wished he'd stop. Sometime over the next 2 days, Ant persuaded her to give the relationship one more chance. And on the 24th of October, Phoebe announced that she was going back to him. She agreed to limit her drinking, she went back to her job at Savvy, and for a few weeks, it seemed the problems in the relationship had blown over. The peace didn't last long. At 10 a.m. on November 23rd, Phoebe called her dad, telling him that Ant had thrown her out and could he please come and pick her up. He left immediately. He found her waiting alongside the road with her case and belongings beside her. Her dad took her back to his apartment, where she stayed for 3 days. Ant took Phoebe out to dinner and convinced her to move back in. Neither her father or brother was able to change her mind. At 8 a.m. on Monday, November 23rd, Phoebe had her usual weekly breakfast with her dad at a restaurant in South Yarra. Her father used this weekly meetup as a way to keep an eye on her and see how she was doing. He always looked forward to catching up with his daughter. His birthday was coming up, and since Phoebe told him she would not be able to make the party, they agreed to meet up on Thursday night so she and Ant could take him out to dinner to her favorite restaurant, the Golden Triangle, and celebrate. Tuesday, November 30th, turned out to be a bad day for Phoebe. She started drinking early, and by midday had telephoned her psychologist and asked if she could see her. Unfortunately, she had appointments all day, and she couldn't see her, but she gave her the number for various helplines and suggested that Phoebe call them, or, if she was still feeling bad, to go to the nearby Alfred Hospital. Phoebe later claimed that she called the hospital, but she didn't like how they spoke to her, and she called her doctor back. Then, Phoebe began calling her friends one by one, but was unable to find someone to spend the day drinking with her. So she turned to Facebook and messaged an old friend she had attended university with by the name of Brandon Hessen, known as Bren. She told him she would like to meet up and that she was having some issues. Bren agreed to meet up near her apartment complex for coffee at 4 p.m. When he arrived, he found her in front of the apartment waiting. He would later testify in court that she seemed calm and lucid, and they talked about the problems they were both having with their partners. Phoebe told him she felt like an embarrassment to Ant because she worked at such a menial job. She felt he deserved better. After they talked for a while, Bren drove her back to her apartment so she could pick up her old Nokia phone. As soon as she got back into the car, she asked Brendan to drive her to Port Melbourne, to a dealer she knew, so she could obtain drugs. After she bought ecstasy from the dealer, they drove to Bren's house to look at his latest art creations. According to Bren, after taking some ecstasy, Phoebe tried to seduce him. He asked her to stop, and she became violent, punching and kicking. He states he had to restrain her until she calmed down. Bren told Phoebe that he couldn't handle her and said he was going to take her back to Ant's. After this, she calmed down. At 6:03 p.m., Ant returned home from work and, finding no signs of Phoebe, texted Bren, asking him where Phoebe was. How Ant knew she was with Bren, we have no idea. Bren ignored the text. At Bren's house, Phoebe became manic. She ran outside and started to run in and out of traffic on the street. She was playing chicken with the cars, jumping away at the last moment before they hit her. After some time, Bren was able to get her back into the car. Her mood swings were violent. One moment she was happy, the next she was yelling. At 9:30, his car approached Festival Hall in West Melbourne, and Phoebe opened the door, jumped out of Bren's car, and ran. No one would see her again until she arrived at Ant's apartment at 12:29 a.m. that evening. According to Ant, she was still asleep in bed when he left for work that Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. He claimed he took her iPhone with him when he left, but this statement regarding Phoebe's phone has changed a number of times, as we will see. At 10:30 a.m., Phoebe texts from her iPhone, the same one Ant claims to have taken to the repair center. The text is as follows. Hi, family. I am in bed and about to sleep, and when I wake, I will transform into the most incredible human being you have ever seen. Not. I will go to hospital. It's safer there, and I hear the special tonight is tomato soup. Delicious, nutritious. I love you all very much, but not enough to send an individual text. Sorry about that, but time is sleep, and I must be on my way. Merrily, 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 life is... This was sent as a group text to Len, Ant, her boss, Michelle Silvana, her mother, Natalie, her brothers, Tom and Nick, her grandmother, Jeanette Campbell, and Natalie's partner, Russell Marriott. After receiving this bizarre text, Phoebe's grandmother, Jeanette, was so worried she called Ant and asked him to check in on her. Ant assured her that he would stop in on Phoebe at lunchtime to check on her as she was sleeping off her bender and have her call Jeanette when she awoke. These statements differ from Ant's second police statement, where Phoebe had told him that morning she'd taken 2 of his Stilnox sleeping tablets. Stilnox is the Australian version of Ambien, containing the same active ingredient, zolpidem tartrate. He also states that he took the pill bottle away from her to make sure that she did not take any more. One major problem with the statement regarding the sleeping pills is that there is no entry in the apartment key fob access records showing Ant's return visit. Key fob access records provided by Eric Giamaro, the building manager, show that Ant's key fob showed an exit swipe at 9 a.m. and an arrival swipe at 7:33 p.m. that evening. No swipes were recorded for Ant during the day. So he is either lying about his return visit in conversation with Phoebe, or he has a way to enter and leave the apartment complex without having his key fob recorded. At 2:17 p.m., Sally Teller, Ant's cleaning lady, entered the apartment, using her own key fob and apartment key. The door to the master bedroom was closed. Upon hearing Ant's dog Yoshi scratching, she let him out and noticed Phoebe sleeping on the bed. The room was dark with the blinds closed. As she cleaned the apartment, Phoebe came out of the master bedroom wearing a t-shirt and shorts. Phoebe smiled at her, and according to Sally's testimony, she looked fine, not at all like someone who had just slept off a recent drunk. After she cleaned the bedroom, she said Phoebe put on an eye mask and went back to sleep. Sally left the apartment around 5 p.m. Ant returned home at 7:33 p.m. and cooked dinner. Phoebe called her dad at 8 p.m. that night and apologized for lying about why she had to miss his birthday, and told him that she was sick, recovering from her drinking the night before. She stated that Ant was taking care of her and she would be fine. This was the last time Len would ever speak to his daughter. Thursday, December 2nd, started routinely for Ant. He woke early and drove his Range Rover to his gym. He returned home at 8:15 a.m. to take a shower and leave for work. His key fob recorded him leaving the apartment complex at 9 a.m. He had a busy day planned with meetings on and off site. The apartment key fob records would not show another access log in his name until 6:05 p.m. We can speculate that Phoebe was still in bed when Ant left, as was her custom. Not much is known about how she spent her day until her image shows up on the apartment complex closed-circuit camera system at 11:41 a.m. She is seen leaving the apartment through the front door during a fire alarm activation caused by building construction crews. Phoebe is wearing sunglasses, tank top, and jeans. She is walking with her dog Yoshi. She does appear to stumble at one point, but seems to be acting normal as she leaves the building. This will be the last time she is seen until her body is discovered later that day. Phoebe's body was discovered by concierge Beth Oslop. It had not been a good day for Beth. The building fire alarm had already went off at 11:30 a.m., and all 23 floors had to be evacuated. It turned out to be a false alarm set off by construction crews working in the building. And now at 6:05 p.m., the alarm was going off again. Beth, the construction crews, and the firemen that had responded to the alarm met in the fire control room and decided that it was another false alarm set off by the men working on the building. The firemen decided there was no need for a full evacuation and reset the alarm. By 6:35 p.m., they had left, and things were getting back to normal. Beth received a call regarding a mess in one of the elevators and headed to the maintenance room to grab the vacuum and clean it up. Unfortunately, the vacuum wasn't working. She was going to have to clean the elevator the old-fashioned way, with a broom and dustpan. But they were nowhere in sight. Then she remembered she had last seen them against the wall in the garbage compactor room. During a normal shift, Beth did her best to avoid the compactor room. It contained a sensor-driven conveyor belt on which rode 5 garbage bins. They moved automatically and along the belt as they became filled. What really bothered Beth was the smell. People in the building threw every nasty thing you can imagine down the garbage chutes on their floors, and many times the waste missed the bins. Walking over to the compactor room door, Beth unlocked it and tried to push it open. But something was in the way. Using her shoulder, she gave the door a hard push and was able to open it further. This movement triggered the automatic lighting system in the room, and all its lights turned on. She could see that a bin had toppled off the conveyor, and there was garbage everywhere. Then she noticed something else jammed between the door and the wall, not allowing the door to open fully. It looked like a mangled mass covered in blood, resembling a young woman lying on her back. At first, Beth thought it was a store mannequin that some resident had sent down the garbage chute. Slowly, an ice-cold chill traveled up her spine. She backed away, closing the door of the compactor room, and stood outside it for a few minutes. The chill only got stronger, and everything seemed to slow. Steeling herself and pushing down her fear, she opened the door again. This time, she did not look directly at the body. Instead, she stared straight ahead and, using her peripheral vision, scanned the motionless figure. There was no doubt. This had been a person. Still looking forward, she saw that the compactor room was a scene out of a horror movie. There was blood everywhere. Congealing blood trails led towards the body, and the rest of the floor was covered in garbage. The scream that left Beth's mouth was blood-curdling. She ran straight to the maintenance office and called her boss, Eric. He was in line at McDonald's on the other side of town and could only make out a few of her words. Blood, garbage, dead. He told her to call 000, Australia's version of 911, and said he was on his way. Within minutes, police cars and emergency vehicles filled the front parking area of the apartment complex. Ant had arrived home from work that evening. The parking garage records his arrival at 6:05 p.m., just 30 minutes before Phoebe's body would be found. He proceeds to take the elevator up to his 12th floor apartment. He has stated later to law enforcement that he could not remember if his front door was locked when he arrived. His dog Yoshi had made a mess, tearing up the couch pillow cushions. He claims there was no sign of Phoebe, but he did notice her keys, key fob, and handbag on the kitchen counter. Now, this was strange, since her key fob was needed to access anywhere in the apartment complex. You could leave the complex without it, but you couldn't get back in. He found several Post-it notes covered with strange scribbling stuck to the kitchen counter. He claims he went up to the master bedroom and found, in his words, a shrine on the bed made up of a photo of himself and Phoebe, a picture of their cat, and a lot of rambling notes, not making any sense. He also found lit candles, and Phoebe's hair straightening wand was on the floor, plugged in. At 6:51, Phoebe's father, Len, calls into her iPhone. Len claims that Aunt answered the phone and they spoke. Aunt would later claim to police that he never answered Phoebe's cell phone and that had just happened to call Len on his cell phone at the same time. Len was calling to find out the time to meet for dinner at the Golden Triangle restaurant. Remember, they were going to celebrate his birthday. Aunt tells him that Phoebe is not there, but she left her purse and keys, so she can't be too far away. Len was worried when he found out that Phoebe wasn't home. So much so that he suggested Aunt report her missing. Aunt refused, saying that law enforcement won't listen until 48 hours have passed anyway, and she will probably be home by then. Acting not concerned at all about his missing girlfriend, decides not to wait for her and calls the Golden Triangle restaurant and orders delivery for one. Remember, this is the same restaurant that Phoebe, Len, and he were supposed to be at that night to celebrate Len's birthday. The delivery boy arrives at 8 p.m. and buzzes Aunt's building intercom. The delivery boy is confused. He cannot bring the food up to Aunt's apartment because, in his words, the front of the building is swarming with police and ambulances, and tells Aunt that he will have to come down to get his food. When Aunt arrives in the lobby, he sees for himself the chaos. He grabs a policeman and tells him that he is a resident of the apartment and asks him, "What's going on?" The policeman, Senior Sergeant Andrew Healy, tells Aunt that a woman's body was found in the garbage compactor room. Aunt is quoted as saying, "Oh no, my girlfriend is missing. Could it be her?" Now let's pay attention as we see how quickly Aunt establishes his alibi. Remember, he just stepped off the elevator, and this is the first law enforcement officer he sees. Aunt tells Sergeant Healy that he's been at work all day, but he was calling Phoebe every couple of hours on her home phone since her iPhone was broken. Now, this is the same iPhone that he just took a call from her dad on. He said that she was suffering from depression and was taking a few different types of medication. He claimed that he had made a couple of calls to try and find her when he got home, but she usually turned up on her own. He also said that she had left some strange post-it notes, but had no idea where she had gone. Sergeant Healy, trying to ID the girl in the trash compactor, asks Aunt if Phoebe had any tattoos, and he tells them that they both have a matching tattoo on their right wrists, and she has a stud piercing on her left upper lip. Sergeant Healy sends Aunt back to his apartment to get a recent photo of Phoebe. After a moment, he follows Aunt up to his apartment. He asks Aunt if Phoebe has a tattoo on her stomach, to which Aunt replies she did. After Sergeant Healy looks at a photo of Phoebe given to him by Aunt, he tells Aunt that he believes the dead girl was in fact Phoebe. Not able to get a cell signal in the apartment, Sergeant Healy headed back down to the lobby and sent a detective up to Aunt's apartment to examine it. What he finds is strange. There was a broken glass and blood on the floor, and scribbling on post-it notes all around the apartment. When they ask Aunt if he could ID Phoebe's body, he refuses. He then calls his mother, Suzanne, and stepfather, Robert. He did not call his father, retired Supreme Court Judge George Hempel, since he was out of town. He next called Phoebe's dad, Len, to tell him she was dead. He suggested to Len to call Phoebe's brothers and come over to the apartment. Now remember, he has still not viewed the body. Emergency dispatch had assigned the job to the South Melbourne Police Unit 303. They had arrived at 7:14 p.m. Beth met them at the compactor room door and handed the policeman the keys. She said that she could not go back in there, and she returned to the maintenance office. Later, as the attending detective sent Beth home, he was overheard to say that she shouldn't worry about it that much, that the girl had committed suicide by putting herself down the garbage chute. Eric Giamaro, the building manager, also didn't go into the compactor room, but tried to be as helpful as possible. He told law enforcement at the scene that the building security cameras might be helpful, but they had to act quickly, as the looping time for the recordings was short and the tapes may be recorded over at any time. Strangely, the police did not seem interested, and it would be weeks before anyone viewed the security tapes. The ambulance arrived at 7:20, and the paramedics raced to the compactor room. Christy Cook, the first EMT on scene, saw the body through the open doorway and headed into the compactor room. The police officer guarding the doorway stopped her. He refused to let her enter. Now, this is unheard of. It was her job to attend to the victim, who very well still might be alive. She demanded to be let in, but the police in charge refused her entry. She was able to observe from the doorway that it was a female lying on her back, with cuts to her right thigh and hip and with her right foot in an unnatural position. From this, she thought that the victim had a fractured ankle. Also, the body did not appear to be breathing. Christie was none too happy about not being able to assess the victim. In fact, no medical personnel were allowed to see Phoebe in the compactor room. When the forensics team entered the room sometime later, they stated that Phoebe had survived the fall down the garbage shaft and had crawled across the room to the door. Later, when questioned, Christie felt that there was a possibility that Phoebe could have survived if EMS personnel had just been able to get to her. And I think that's where we will stop for today. Now, as much as I hate posting two-parters, I don't really have a choice with this one. There's just so much information to cover. The good thing is the episode is already written and recorded, so you won't have to wait a full week. I plan to drop the next episode on this Friday. So follow me or subscribe or whatever you have to do in your podcast player of choice, and you won't miss an episode. We will cover the investigation into Phoebe's death, the inquest, and the aftermath. I will also detail how I think Phoebe was murdered, and more importantly, who I think did it. Thank you all so much for listening. Please visit my webpage at truecrimebreakdown.com, where I have extensive photos and timelines related to the case. There you can also find the citation page for my sources in case you want to do some investigating for yourself. Feel free to email me at mail@truecrimebreakdown.com with case suggestions. If you have any questions or ideas about the case, we can also discuss it on Twitter. Please follow me at TCBD Podcast.